Hi. So last week we spent time talking about organelles. This week we're going to specifically talk about the cell membrane. And if you remember, the cell membrane covers your entire cell, and it specifically will let things in and out of your cell. So let's go ahead and begin. All right. So the first thing we're going to start with is the structure of the cell membrane. If you hear the word structure, we're talking about what it's made out of. So what it looks like, what it's made out of. And in your membrane, what it's doing, it's creating a homeostasis. If you think of homeostasis, think like stable internal environments. That means you have the perfect amount of every single ion, the perfect amount of water, everything is the perfect amount. And that is one of the biggest jobs of your cell membrane, is to maintain that, making sure that you have just enough of what you need so that you don't have too much of one thing and you get dehydrated, or too much or not enough, or vice versa. So that's exactly what happens. So if you take a look at your cell membrane, you have this this lipid bilayer. So these are your lipids. So if you remember, lipids are fats. We're going to look at proteins. These are channel ways. And you've got a carbohydrate chain. So those are the three. So we'll start with the lipid bilayer. So lipid, fat by two layer. So there's a double layer of fat. It's made up of a head and a tail. So the head is always facing either outside of the cell or facing inside of the cell. And your head is called hydrophilic. It loves water. So, of course, because a lot of your cytoplasm is made of water, and a lot of outside of your cell is made up of water. So, of course, it's going to like water. The tails, if you take a look, see the tail is hydrophobic. Just think about a phobia. What does it mean if you have a phobia? You're scared of it. So this part of the cell does not like water. Okay, it's like scared of it. And that's very good because it keeps it out. So you want to keep water out of this area. So you have water here, right? So you have the water loving. So the head is called hydrophilic, water loving. The tail is called hydrophobic, water hating. And that makes that oily layer around your cell, and it helps to regulate how much water gets in and out. So embedded within, and then just so you guys know, embedded means like it's placed there, like it's stuck in that region. Embedded in your lipid bilayer, you have these protein, either a channel, so this would be a channel, it's just an opening, so things can go through, because obviously you still have to have structures going through, or you have a pump. If it says a pump, that means you need energy, so ATP would come up, and it literally would move and pump things through. So those are your proteins. So you have your you have your lipid bilayer, and you have your protein pumps. You also have a carbohydrate. So your carbohydrate makes this little chain, and it's kind of like your ID card. It helps to, so cells are all over the place, right? So think about think like a blood cell is just flowing all over the place. But you also have things like bacteria, and it's very important that your cells know what is good and what is bad. So carbohydrates is basically like your car to say, hey, don't attack me. I'm good and I belong here. Okay, so let's get into the transport systems. So now that we know what everything is made out of, we're going to talk about transport. The first one's called passive transport. Just think passive. If something is called passive, you don't really need a lot of energy for it. There's no ATP for these two types of transport. So you don't need energy because things are moving along the natural gradient. So cell is trying to maintain homeostasis, which includes the amount of materials inside of the cell. So you want to make sure always that you have the same amount of materials outside as inside. If one is higher than the other, that's when you're going to have passive transport. So passive transport is always from high concentration of solute. And just so you remember, solutes are what dissolves in water. Solvent is the water. So yeah. So let's start with simple diffusion. So simple diffusion is going to go right through the membrane. You don't need a protein or anything. It's just going to go right through. Again, no ATP is needed. It's always, everything in life and everything in science always goes from high to low. So it's always going to go from a high concentration to a low concentration. So you can see the solutes here. So this is like the particles, so the solute, the thing that dissolves into water. So this, an example would be like salt, sodium, sugar, any of the monomers. So you have more on this side and this side. So naturally, it's going to go from high to low, and the molecules are going to move through the membrane to go inside your cell. So for instance, if you have a high salt diet, your cells are going to be filled with salt because it's high to low. There's no protein pump or channel needed. So that's simple diffusion. It's very simple. It just goes right through the membrane. Facilitated diffusion. Facilitated means you need help. You still, no ATP though, because it's going from a high concentration to a low. As long as your solutes are going from high to low, you will not need energy. So outside of your cell, you have more than inside, so it's going to go from high to low, and it's going to transfer through your channel protein. So this one would just be a channel. It's just an opening. It's not a pump. It's just going to flow through. But so these ones are a little bigger. Why doesn't it just go through? It's too big. Can't fit. Or it has a charge. So it's either positive or negatively charged. So it gets stuck in here. So because like they like to stick to things. So you need a channel to go through. Okay. So if it's too big or charged, you need a channel to help it. Just like if you had like a large ship and you would see like maybe like the everything raise up to follow through. Osmosis. So here's an important one. So we have osmosis. So osmosis is the diffusion of water. So we were talking about, so simple diffusion and facilitated diffusion are the solutes. Those are the things that dissolve into water. Osmosis is just the water. So diffusion of water through the membrane. Water will always move from, again, a high level of concentration to low. So when you're looking at these pictures, you're looking at water. If you take a look here, there's not a lot of solute, but there's a lot of water. So you have a higher concentration of water here compared to here because you have less solutes. There's less things in your water, so you're more water. So this would be like, less salt water, and there'd be like tons of salt water over here. This is your membrane. So this is an imaginary membrane. So naturally what's going to happen is your water is going to go from high concentration to low. And I know it's not higher, right? There's not more when it comes to like volume, but because there's less solutes, that gives you more water. And it's going to go from high to low, and it's going to move through the membrane. And as you can see now, you have less water on this side because it went from high to low. Again, no energy or ATP is needed. There are 3 different types of situations with water. So the first one is called isotonic. If it says isotonic, you are at homeostasis, you are perfect, you are perfectly hydrated, you have just the amount of electrolytes you need, let's say, in your body. And I'm just using this as an example because we all know what hydration is. These are red blood cells. You can always tell because it looks like a little tube. And then you can see how water is going in and out naturally. So in isotonic, your water will just like flow in and out, and it's like everything is even. You're at homeostasis. So isotonic, perfect, thumbs up. So next we have hypertonic. So for when something is hypertonic, I always think if someone's hyper, like I always think of hyper, like, I want to get out of here, I'm so hyper. I don't know if it makes any sense, but it's essentially what happens right here. Now look at your red blood cells. This is a natural red blood cell. Now this one is so this would be like an unhealthy red blood cell. So what happened is all the water flowed out. So hypertonic water is flowing out. Why does water flow out? Because you have a higher concentration of solutes here. So that means, remember that picture? So the water is going to be like, oh, I'm going to dilute you. Oh, I'm sorry, here. So like that means inside the cell, this is inside, by the way, this is outside. So inside the cell, you have less solutes, so that means you have more water. And then that means out here you have less water and more solutes. So the water's gonna be like, boop, I'm out of here. And when that happens, this is, what's an example of this occurring would be like dehydration. So if you are dehydrated, that means you have like, or you eat too much salt, right? They say, so a good amount of salt's good because you're okay. But let's say you were like dehydrated, there's a low amount of water solutes on the outside of your cell. Literally, this is going to happen to all your cells. And that's why when people get headaches and they don't feel good, drink water. Too much water is not good. So hypertonic, water is moving out. So hyper, it's getting out of there. Hypotonic is the next one. So hypo, I like to think of hypo, so you see this O right here, hypo, your cells are going to balloon up like an O. So I like to think of hypotonic. Your cells are going to expand into a perfect circle. So this would be if you had too much water. So you have too much water, so you have a low concentration of solutes on the outside versus water. So you have a lot of water on the outside and high to low. It's going to go in your cell. Everything, the water is always moving from high to low concentration. So your red blood cells will become swollen. A really awesome example, or not awesome, is in hazing. In some colleges, they would have them drink too much water, and people died because their cells would explode because all their cells were getting flooded due to hypotonicity, and they were not alive in the morning. So hypotonic is just something dramatic to help you remember. Remember the O. Water flows in, makes it plump up. Hypertonic flows out, hypotonic flows in. Okay, so the three types of passive transport we just had, or passive, or we had just normal passive transport, facilitated, and osmosis, and now we're going to go to active. So passive transport means that there's literally, so passive transport means there's no ATP needed. You don't need energy. Everything is flowing from high to low. So it's a natural gradient. Active transport, you're going against the concentration gradient. So maybe the cell just produced a lot of something, and it has to go against the concentration gradient. Therefore, ATP is needed. ATP is your body's energy. We'll learn a lot about that later. But so the ATP will come in attached to your pump. And normally it'd be high to low, right? But because it's opposite, it would just take the low and move it in. Molecular transport. So this would be small molecules and ions. It will move through a pump. So when you need a pump, so different than a channel is just an opening. A pump, again, from low to high, it's going against the concentration gradient, and you need ATP. So it needs to be pumped through. It just doesn't flow naturally like in passive. So yes. Another one is called bulk transport. Bulk transport is going to literally take it and swallow it. It's really cool. It swallows it up and pulls it in. Endocytosis means it's moving the materials inside of the cell. Exocytosis means it's moving it out. So if it's too big to go through a pump like this, it's too large, then it's going to be a bulk transport. So endo, inside. Endo, it's going inside your cell. Exo, I think exit. It's going to be, so the vesicle and vacuole would come in, right? So the vesicle and vacuole come in. It would fuse and then move right out of the cell. Okay? And that is all. So we will practice this week. We have a lab, but you want to get your terms correct. You're going to take some time right now, and you're going to go, and I have it on the thing too, but you're going to go and you're going to tell me what number you think are on a scale based on your score. Okay? Thanks, guys.